Okay, so today for 4.5, we're going to talk about how to analyze group data. When individual data measures are not readily available and instead we're given a frequency distribution, this is called grouped data. So here's what I mean by that. Let's say they didn't give you the raw data. They didn't tell you this person likes brown, this person likes red, this person likes blue, this person also likes brown. They went ahead and compiled that into a frequency table. That's called grouped data. Now, there is still a way to analyze it. It just takes a little bit different approach. So to find the mean, variance, and standard deviation of grouped data, we have to use the following formulas. Note that these will be approximations because like if we had every single piece of raw data, we would be able to add them all together, divide by how many they are, and know the exact average. But since we already have like a frequency distribution, it's a little bit different. So the mean of grouped data. Now mind you, it's different for population and sample because like we don't know how many are in the population. Now, we need to understand what these symbols mean. Okay, you have to know what these symbols mean. So first and foremost, this is mu. What does mu represent? The population mean. Population mean. Okay. What does capital N represent? Do we remember? Good. Population size, number in population. Okay. Now, and I'm just focusing on this equation right here before we move on. What does this guy mean? We call it sigma. What does this guy mean? Sum. Very good. Now we have this F sub I. F sub I. That's a new one. That represents the frequency of each class. Okay, that represents the frequency of each class. Okay, F stands for frequency. Then this capital M, that one's also new. That represents the midpoint of each class. The midpoint of each class. Okay? So after that little refresher there, let's take a look at this equation or this formula as a whole. The population mean equals the sum of my frequency times my midpoint. So for each class, I'm going to take my frequency times my midpoint. I'm going to take the sum of all of those and divide that by how many total values are in that class or in that population. Cool? Now let's go to the sample. What does X bar stand for? That's still the sample median or mean. Sample mean. Okay. Then we still have the sum of the frequency times the midpoint. That hasn't changed, but what does lowercase n stand for? Sample size. Very good. Sample size. So essentially the population and the sample means are really the same formula. They just use different symbols. Now let's look at the variance. Let's look at the variance. What does sigma squared stand for? Sigma squared. Population variance. Population variance. Now to find the population variance, we are going to take the sum of the midpoint minus the mean squared times the frequency and divide it by the population size. Okay? And then S squared, what is S squared going to be? Sample variance. Very good. And that's the same concept. We're going to take the sum of the midpoint minus the mean squared times the frequency. We're just going to divide it by the sample size minus 1. Now my next question is, how do I find the population and sample standard deviation? Like I don't see a formula for that. How do I find that? What is population standard deviation? How do the standard deviation and the variance relate to one another? standard deviation is the square root of the variance. That's all it is. That's all it is. So if you want the population standard deviation, it's just sigma. Okay, that's all it is. You would just square root your variance. And then if you want the the sample standard deviation, it would just be S. So if you have the variance to find the standard deviation, all you have to do is square root it. That's all you're doing. So let's look at this example. It says a frequency of response times for 911 calls from EMTs is shown below. Calculate the population mean for the response time. Round your answer to 2 decimal places if necessary. Now, they specified that this was population. On your problems on Hawk's Learning, it is going to specify population or sample, okay? So that's the formula that I'm going to use up there at the top. So it says response times for ENT. The response time in minutes, from 6 to 6.9 minutes, the frequency was 21. So they had 21 calls that their response time was in the 6-minute mark, okay? They had 22 calls that their response time was in the 7-minute mark. Does that make sense? So here is the table that we are going to end up filling out. So what I would like you to do is go to your Excel sheet, because we are not going to do this by hand, okay? And notice on your Excel sheet, I split things up. Instead of having a column for response time in minutes, I split that up into lower and upper. And that's really important, because right here, what we're going to find is we are going to find the midpoint, okay, the midpoint. And what they mean by midpoint is what is the midpoint of each class. What is the midpoint of each class? So what you're going to do is you're going to take the lower and the upper and find the average of them, add them together and divide by 2. If I wouldn't have split them into those columns, you would have to sit here and by hand you would have to go open parentheses 6 plus 6.9 divided by 2. And that would take, okay, and that would take forever, because then for the next one you would have to go enter parentheses 7 plus 7.9, close your parentheses, divided by 2. And that's too long. We don't want that. We are using Excel. The whole purpose of Excel is to make things quick and easy. Like, that's the whole general gist of it. So by creating a lower category and an upper category, here's what I can do instead. Are you ready? We're going to hit equals, and we're still going to do open parenthesis, but instead of typing in 6 and 6.9, now I can use the cell reference. I can click on A6 plus B6, close your parenthesis, and divide it by 2. Then, instead of having to do it for the rest of the columns, I can just drag it down. And it's going to take the lower and the upper of each column and average them. So the midpoint for each one of our categories is 6.45, 7.45, 8.45. You get the gist, okay? You get the gist. Now, the formula. Remember, the whole thing that we're focusing on is the formula here. This is what we're trying to figure out. Remember, you get these formulas on the test. You have to know how to read them, how to interpret them, and how to use them, all right? So you get this formula, so we know the frequency. F stands for frequency. We already have that here. Do you guys see that? We just found the midpoint. We just found the midpoint. Now we want the sum of the frequency times the midpoint. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to take my frequency and multiply it by my midpoint. That's what we want to do next. So I'm going to hit equals, and I want my frequency times my midpoint. So again, I took C6 times D6. And then again, guys, we're just going to drag it down. We're just going to drag it down. That's all we need to do. Okay? There? We're okay? Jocelyn, you okay? Okay. Oh, okay. Now, again, guys, when you are stuck and you're like, what in the heck am I doing? Look back at the formula. So we know the frequency, we know the midpoints, we literally just multiplied them all together, and now what do I want of them? I want the sum of them. So I'm going to come down here below this, and I'm just going to type in equals sum of, and I want all of those numbers at the frequency times the midpoint. 12, not 13. Fat fingers today. So that is the sum of all of my frequencies times all of my midpoints. Now, according to the formula, what do I want to do with those? Divide by how many we have. So again, we're figuring out this formula right here. We just found that the sum of the frequency times the midpoint is 2071.65. We just figured that out. Now we want to divide by how many there are, and how many classes are there? Or sorry, not classes. How many total values are there? Now, this is where things are a little bit interesting, because you'll sit here and you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7. No, there's 7 classes. We want to divide by the population size. What is the size of this class? 21. What is the size of this class? 22. What is the size of this class? 35. So to find the entire population size, you're going to have to add all of these guys together. So what you're going to do is you're going to come over underneath the frequency, and you're going to type in equals sum of, and you want all of the frequencies. I swear, if I don't stop highlighting cell 13 in there, I'm going to lose my mind today. So how many total calls did they collect data from? 217. So to find this population mean, we're going to take that and divide it by 217. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to come over here, and I'm going to put mu equals. Okay, so that way I know exactly what I'm solving for here. I know exactly where to find my answer. And here you're going to type equals. You want this number divided by this number. So it said calculate the population mean and variance for the response time. Round your answer to 2 decimal places if necessary. Now I'm going to teach you a little trick. To what? To this guy? So I took this guy right here, the sum of the frequency times the midpoint, and I divided it by this guy right here, all of the frequencies. Now the instructions say round to 2 decimal places if necessary. I'm going to be honest, you guys are terrible at rounding, terrible at it, okay? Excel can do it for you. So watch this. I have that cell highlighted. I'm on that cell right here. If you go up here, do you see where it says number and there's arrows and numbers here, arrows and zeros? That's going to change it for you. So if I highlight here, it says decrease decimals, show fewer decimals. I'm going to drop that down until I get my 2 decimal places. Boom, there it is, 9.55. Now, it doesn't cut your actual number off. It just rounds it so that you see it. So if you use that cell reference in the future, you're not actually using the rounded value, you're using the whole value, but for simplicity's sake, it allows you to see something a little easier. So your mu value is about 9.55 here, which means according to this data, according to this frequency table, the average response time was 9.55 minutes. Okay? Now let's calculate the population variance. We want the population variance. Now the formula for population variance I have down here. You guys again have it on your sheet. We want the sum of my midpoint minus my mean squared times my frequency all over the population total, population size. So do we have the midpoint? We've already calculated that. Good. Do we have the mean? Did we just figure out the mean? Absolutely. So my next column right here is going to be my midpoint minus my mean. My midpoint minus my mean. So I'm going to type in equals, and you're going to come back over here, and there's your midpoint. And we're going to subtract my mean, which is at 9.55. But do I want the cell for the mean to change? No, so we want that to be an absolute cell reference. So I want $, $. Then you can just click and drag it down. So I don't know if you've caught on to this, but here's what you're doing. You're finding the deviation from your midpoint to the mean. You're saying how far away is my midpoint from the mean, right? Now, just like we learned a couple of class periods ago, next we have to square it so they all turn into positive numbers, right? So I'm going to take my midpoint minus my mean, which we just had, and I'm going to square it. Okay? I'm going to square it. Again, that's literally taking your number and making sure that it's positive. It's ensuring that it's positive. So I'm going to take this cell right here, so equals this cell right here, squared. You're just squaring it. Now that's way too many decimal points. Dang. Excel is killing me today. Shoot. And we're just going to drag it on down. If you want to leave yours with that many decimal points, it doesn't bother me. It's fine. It's up to you. Now, something else that you could be aware of is you could do these two columns right here. You could actually do that in one step. You really don't even need this step if you don't want to, because you could, in a cell reference, type equals, parenthesis, your midpoint minus your mean, absolute cell reference, and square it all in one step. If you want to do that, you are welcome to do that, but I'm typing it as a table so you know what the heck we're doing, okay? So it's like progressive. Yes? That one? Mm-hmm. So you take, literally, you're taking just this column, this cell, right before it and squaring it, so to the second power. And then you're just dragging it down. All right. So if we're looking back at our formula, we have this guy right here. We have the midpoint minus my mean squared, okay? Now, what do I need to do with that? What do I need to do with that? Multiply it by the frequency. So you're going to come here. We're going to take this times my frequency. Okay, so here's how we're going to do that. Ready? Equals that last cell that we just found times frequency. Then what are we going to do? Drag it down. Okay? So we took all the means, we took all the midpoints, we subtracted the means, we squared them, we multiplied by the frequency. Now what do I need for that? We need the sum of all of those. Now check this out, guys. You are more than welcome to come down here and type in equals sum, blah, 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 and highlight all again. That's no big deal. It doesn't take that much time. Mathematicians are lazy. I'm as lazy as they come. You can ask my husband. Super lazy. Hate doing stuff, right? So if you want to, you can come over here where we already found the sum of this column. And since this column size didn't change, it's still the same number of cells, I can just copy and paste, and it's now going to find the sum of all of these for me. I just found the sum. That's all I did. If you want to type in equal sum, that's okay. Yes? I think it's just from Alvin. Should be okay. Okay? So what we have right now is we have my numerator. I just found this whole thing. And when you find the sum, it should be 642.97. 642.97. Okay? So that's what you should get. Now, again, your rounding might be a little off. Depends on how many decimal points you show. Now, to find the variance, we need to take that sum and divide it by what? How many total we have? We already figured out that frequency. We already used it up here. So what am I going to divide it by? 217. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put variance equals so I know what the heck I'm finding. Okay, that's how I keep my stuff organized. So I have variance equals, and it's going to be that sum that I just found divided by that 217 over here on the frequency. And then something that you are going to have to do on your test that you should get used to now is whenever you find an answer, highlight it. So I say the mu is 955, the mean is 955, the variance is 2.96. So that means my variance here is about 2.96. Now tell me, if that's my variance, how do I find my standard deviation? You square root it. So to square root it on Excel, here's what you're going to do. So you're going to go standard deviation equals, and again, I just center it here, and I'm just going to go equals SQRT, that stands for square root. You can do that. And I'm just going to take the square root of the variance cell. Square root of the variance cell. Now don't forget, your problem wanted it rounded to the nearest hundredth, so 2 decimal places. So I'm going to move that until it's 2 decimal places. So your standard deviation here is about 1.72. So tell me, does that mean the data they collected is relatively close together or far apart? I'd say kind of close together. You know, it kind of depends, but I think that's pretty good. So that means my standard deviation is about 1.72. Yes, sir?
Can you show me how you do the standard deviation right
To find the standard deviation, I just took the square root equals SQRT of the variance. Good. All right. So here's what we're going to do next. We're just going to get a little practice with this. We're going to do it 2 more times. Okay, we're going to do it 2 more times. So on Excel, I've already given you the data, so you don't have to type it in. So we're going to go down to number 2 on Excel. And again, I gave it to you with the upper and lower and the frequency. It says, calculate the sample mean and the sample variance for the following frequency distribution of heart rates for a sample of American adults. If necessary, round to 1 more decimal place than the largest number of decimal places given. Now guys, be very, very, very careful here. They specified that this is a sample. That's going to tell you that we're going to use the other formula. So again, I've already split it into lower, upper, and frequency. Now the formula that we are going to use here, to find the sample mean is x bar equals the sum, I don't know what that is, the sum of my frequency times my midpoint divided by the sample size. Okay? Now, to figure that out, we are going to create a table very similar to number 1. So we already have my frequency, we first need to find my midpoint. So we're going to find my midpoint here. Do you guys remember how we find the midpoint? We're going to take equals, parentheses, the lower plus the upper, close your parentheses, divided by 2. Then drag it on down. Okay, then according to our formula, what am I going to do next? Yes, we need to multiply it by the frequency. We have the midpoints, now we're going to multiply it by the frequency. So F times M equals frequency times the midpoint. Okay? Now again, if you're ever like, I don't know what to do, how do I figure out what to do next? Look at the formula. Okay? We found the frequency. We found the midpoint. We multiplied them together. What do I have to do next? We have to find the sum of them. Very good. So I'm going to go equals sum of all of these bad boys. Now what? We divide by the sample size. How do I find out the sample size? Very good. We find the sum of the frequency. So equals sum of all of these. Now, to label this one, you can label it one of two ways. So for the one up above, I labeled it mu. This is not mu. So you can label it mean if you want, or you can label it x bar. Either one. Like you guys know they mean the same thing. I know they mean the same thing. Either way you want to label it is fine. But to find it, what do I do? Equals what? That's good. 3151 divided by 43. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And then what did they say to round it to? They said round it to one more decimal place than the largest number of decimal places given in the data. So yes, this only has, what's the largest decimal place in the data? There are no decimal places, so I'm going to round it to the nearest tenth. Good, just one more. And then you're going to highlight it. Now the reason that I gave you that rounding information, if you haven't noticed, Hawk's Learning does that all the time. Round it to one more decimal place than they gave you. So if they gave you one decimal place, give them 2. If they gave you 3 decimal places, give them 4. All right. Next, we need to find the sample variance and sample standard deviation. So the formula for sample variance, S squared equals, we want the sum of my midpoint minus my mean squared times my frequency all over my sample size minus 1. Kind of running together there. Okay? So, based on this formula, what should I do first? Midpoint minus the mean. And can you guys tell me, what am I going to do with that right off the bat? So what if we do that all in one step? What if we say, instead of doing midpoint minus mean and then squaring it, what if we say I'm going to take the midpoint minus the mean, x bar, and square it right away? Are you guys okay with that? If you're not, do it in 2 steps. I don't care. Makes no difference to me. It's whatever you're comfortable with. So here's what we're going to do. Equals, parentheses, midpoint minus mean, and what do I have to do to that mean? Absolute cell reference, put those dollar signs, close it, and square it. So all I did is I don't want that many decimal places. All I did is I took these 2 columns right here, and I just did it in 1 step. Okay? If you don't like that, don't do it. Do it in 2 steps. That's okay. But then you can go ahead and drag it on down. I don't need that one. Okay? Then what do I do? Good. Multiply it by frequency. So I'm going to take the m minus x bar squared and then times it by frequency. So equals this, that column that I just figured out, times my frequency. You guys are doing a great job. We just found the midpoint minus my mean squared times the frequency. What do I have to do with all those? Find the sum. Jordan's killing it today. Just the sum. It's just the sum.
Wait, I'm not even there yet.
Okay, we'll get you caught up. And then we divide it by my population size minus 1. So no matter where you are, because we're running short on time, I want you to pause and watch how I do this so you understand there's going to be a little bit of a difference here. So to find my variance, you're going to take equals this sum divided by, and we want this, because this is my sample size here, but I want it minus 1, so I'm going to go parentheses, this cell minus 1, close your parentheses. Like, I don't have to sit here and say, or if you want, like some of you are like, I know that it's going to be 42, you could just type in divided by 42. It's up to you. So that's your variance. How do you find your standard deviation? Square root it. So standard deviation equals square root of this guy. So I'm going to write and there. And there you have it. Now make sure you have the right amount of decimals. So we want one more decimal. And that's it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. You are going to do number 3 with your table partner, those people around you, and then we're going to check it. Be aware on number 3, I didn't give you a lower and an upper. So you're going to have to take this data and make new columns. Okay, I have the frequency. You're going to have to take this data and make new columns. Okay, and when you're done, you should get these values right down here. If you have any questions and you did not get those values, please come see me.